how to actually play Hawkeye in Marvel Rivals.
Not happy with my shots right now.
What the? As somebody who has solo queued 2 Celestial by only playing Hawkeye, and somebody who occasionally picks him in my top 500 matches, even before he was buffed this mid-season patch, I've picked up a trick or two that will help you get some crazy games off with this underrated hero. I mean, despite a 45% win rate, he can definitely solo carry entire games on his own, and if anything, the real reason the win rate is so low is because most people just play him wrong. As usual, we're gonna go over every ability, how they work in depth, along with some tips, and then continue with some additional information like positioning, counters, combos, ways to improve your shots, and so much more. And as usual, this guide is available ad-free, along with scripts and research for future unposted videos, all on my Patreon over at patreon.com/ottr. But anyways, let's dive into it. Hawkeye can seamlessly swap between 2 types of arrowheads. The first type is called the Piercing Arrow. The Piercing Arrow is basically his main arrow and can be charged up to deal more damage, ranging from 8 damage to 80 after it's been fully drawn. Depending on how much you've charged up the arrow will also travel faster and in a straighter arc. The Piercing Arrow can headshot, and when you combine it with Hawkeye's passive ability, Archer's Focus, where you build focus over time as you keep aiming towards enemies within range with your bow as you're either drawing an arrow or holding the bow fully charged. It will do a lot of damage. At 100 focus, you gain an additional 70 damage to your Piercing Arrow. This makes the maximum amount of damage that you can do with a body shot 150 and 300 damage if it headshots. Since the arrow is a projectile, it doesn't actually have any damage fall off, meaning you can snipe enemies from any range if you have the accuracy. Realistically, Archer's Focus and the Piercing Arrow are intertwined, so charging your arrow up while aiming towards an enemy will secure one-shots against any squishies. It is worth noting that the passive only charges up if the enemy is within 40 meters, and it stops charging when you stop aiming towards a target. Not only does it stop charging, but it also drops down to 50 after you stop aiming after a little while. You can also take this to the next level by charging your arrow while building focus on the front line and then plinking towards higher priority targets such as certain duelists or strategists in the back line. It helps that your focus builds through shields, assuming that the enemies are within range. Since the focus only drops down to 50, then this gives you more than plenty to one-shot enemies across all ranges, assuming you fully charge the arrow. Personally, when it comes to hitting any targets, especially across longer ranges, I've found most success by tracking the enemy to build the focus and then making a slight flick to hit them in the head at the very end. It not only builds focus, but makes hitting the snipe significantly easier. It's also worth noting that for most squishies, if you fully charge your arrow and then aim at them for a tiny moment, just enough to build about 30 charge, then a headshot will one-shot them as well. If you don't want to go for the headshots because they are a bit more risky and you know that you have more than enough time to shoot 2 arrows off without the enemy getting healed up or getting behind cover, then you can also just go for 2 body shots instead. Just keep in mind that it does take 2 shots, it doesn't take 1. Since charging up an arrow slows you down with the bow draw animation, this does mean that you need to be mindful when using it so you don't get destroyed from moving around slowly. That being said, if you jump and start drawing your bow when midair, then you won't be slowed down, and the arrow will be almost fully charged by the time you land. Jumping in general is really underrated, especially against certain targets that are taller than you, especially if they're really up close, since the arrow needs to travel from your bow to their head, and if they are taller, then there's a good chance that you'll end up hitting their chests or something else instead. If you jump, especially double jump, then it is more likely that your arrow goes where you want it to. This is even more important when trying to snipe certain heroes like Luna Snow out of their ultimates on account of them literally floating in the air.
Oh, I got the headshot though.
Oh! That being said, if the enemy is up close, then charging a full arrow is very risky and locks you in the bow draw animation for an entire second, which is very likely to have you killed. You can also go for 2 rapid headshots that you release immediately to kill them without adding all of that risk to yourself. That being said, that won't make a big difference when you try to use Hawkeye for one of his main strengths though, that being one-shotting enemies, especially out of supportive ultimates. One fully charged headshot will kill any support, even mid-ultimate, and the value simply cannot be matched. The easiest one to snipe will always be Cloak and Dagger, thanks to them making several stops in the middle of their ultimate. And that being said, you can't charge focus while aiming at them mid-ultimate, so you usually have to substitute by aiming at another enemy instead. What does work is counting their dashes and then hitting them as soon as they stop, ideally at the last charge, as they will stand as still as possible. Making note of whether they use their ultimate as a cloak or dagger, which you can discern based on their voice line, makes a huge difference here, since it affects what animation and hitbox they will have once they leave the ultimate. That being said, if they dash towards you while using their ultimate, then you can still easily headshot them by shooting them in the head. Hawkeye can also load up another set of arrows that, when fired, shoots 3 explosive arrows at a time. Like with your piercing arrow, these can also be charged, but that only affects the arc and the speed and not the damage. That being said, it is kind of a useless feature since the arrows scatter, meaning you won't get any meaningful damage over range with them, on account of only one of them hitting anyways, though that doesn't mean that they don't have any use at all. The blast arrows can be used immediately for maximum damage without needing any charge. They deal 32 damage per arrow and explosion, which isn't all that much when trying to fight a player, but it can be perfect if you're trying to shred shields or walls or Groot walls, since it gives you a pretty high damage per second in situations where you don't need headshots, but can or need to spread your damage out over a region. This lets you deal 96 damage per burst, and since you can fire up to 3 sets of blast arrows at a time, this means you can burst for 288 damage in a pretty short period of time. If your aim absolutely sucks or you're fighting certain squishies, especially if a lot of them are up close, then you can also just shoot the arrows on the ground under them to kill them with 3 arrows. But more often than not, you're just going to be going for the piercing arrows for the one shot instead. Hawkeye can also perform a double jump every few seconds. The double jump instantly adds upwards momentum, as well as a momentum in the direction that you are traveling. If you use the double jump under an obstacle that stops you from traveling the full height, then you will sometimes gain some additional movement in the direction you're traveling instead. If you use a double jump underneath a decline or an arc, then you will travel along it as if it was a reverse ramp, which converts all of your upwards momentum to additional forward momentum instead. This might be hard to use in most fights, but it's very useful when you're rotating back from spawn. Since the Skyward Leap gives you additional momentum, especially when used under a ramp, it makes sense to try and perform a bunny hop by jumping right after landing to conserve some of it moving forward. If you are on PC, then you can add a secondary bind for your jump to your scroll wheel to make hitting the timing a lot easier. Though personally, my scroll wheel is broken, so I just manually jump anyways. It works just fine once you get used to it. Hawkeye's first ability, Crescent Slash, slashes forward, dealing 40 damage, as well as knocking back any nearby enemies within 8 meters. Any enemies within 100 degrees in front of you will be affected, and the closer the enemies are, the farther they get knocked back at a minimum distance of about 5 meters and a maximum of about 15. The Crescent Slash locks enemies in the path, meaning it will stop existing momentum and force them to travel along the slash's course. If the enemy is using a movement or flying ability, such as Doctor Strange, then their movement ability will be cancelled after the ability has landed. Speaking of Doctor Strange, it is also worth noting that the slash pierces through shields, which is perfect if he happens to fly up in your face and tries to stop you from sniping his teammates. The Crescent Slash is a great reactionary ability that isn't used nearly enough, especially against certain ultimates. For example, if a Doctor Strange jumps in your face with his ultimate, then using your Crescent Slash might completely save you or your team by displacing him. Booping and ulting Spider-Man back can also make a huge difference. Another funny use of the Crescent Slash is just using it to boop enemies off the map.
Bye-bye.
Most players in Marvel Rivals really don't respect boops nearly as much as they should. Speaking of slashes, whenever Hawkeye uses his melee, in addition to doing damage, he will also deflect any incoming projectiles and even some hitscan shots. The block starts when you start doing damage until the end of the animation and only blocks shots that are coming from about 180 degrees in front of you. It doesn't block explosions or effects that are caused by those projectiles, like for example Magneto's ultimate or his projectile, but it does block most normal shots just fine. Since you can do 2 slashes in rapid succession, it makes sense to do at least both of these if you're trying to survive in a bad situation. If I am dueling another single shot user, for example another Hawkeye, then I usually go for a shot and immediately slash afterwards. If I'm the one who shot first, then odds are their arrow will be deflected instead of hitting me. If I'm taking a lot of focus from the enemies or need to retreat, I often hold the melee key to try to soak up as much damage as possible while I am walking backwards. If I'm being dove by an enemy, especially a melee enemy, then I normally use the Crescent Slash to send them backwards, but I usually use the melee beforehand and then cancel the animation with the slash to potentially block incoming damage and add a little bit more damage before sending them back. Hawkeye's second ability, Hypersonic Arrow, fires a straight cylinder that pierces shields that deals 50 damage once and then hits enemies again for an additional 50 damage a little while later. Enemies hit by the second blast receive a significant movement slow, and if they are flyers, they are grounded. Enemies currently using flight abilities will have their abilities cancelled.
Nowhere to hide.
While this ability is a great tool to harass flyers out of the sky, especially since it is a lot easier to hit than your typical arrows, that doesn't mean that it only has one use. Since it pierces shields, I very often just fire the arrows straight into the enemy team if they are running up behind a shield. The large cylinder lets me hit most, if not all of them, for 50 to even 100 damage, while also slowing them, which is a ton of damage to get for free, not only in order for me to get ult charge, but it softens them up and makes them more prone to dying from poke, whether that's my own or one of my teammates. The arrow can also be a good tool when opening up a fight, since the slow makes hitting enemies that much easier. The Hypersonic Arrow kind of locks you in an animation without a way to cancel it when fired, but you can use your double jump ability at any time if necessary. What I normally do is I start a second ability, then jump or double jump to get a better view of where I want to shoot it. Hawkeye's ultimate, Hunter's Sight, significantly levels up your damage potential. After activating the ultimate, you'll yell out loudly, get locked in an animation, and then for the next 10 seconds, you will receive multiple buffs to your kit. For the duration of your ultimate, your focus is permanently at 100, your bow draws 20% faster, and every enemy within focus range and your line of sight generates after images every half a second as long as they keep moving. Damage done to the after images applies to the targets they originate from, meaning you can keep sinking shots into the after images for free damage. These shots cannot headshot, but your explosive arrows can deal damage to several after images as well as the original target at the same time. Additionally, your Crescent Slash applies its damage on one after image and original target at the same time, effectively making it do twice the damage if used at the right time during the ultimate. If your enemies go out of range, they get behind shields, get behind a wall, or get outside of your own line of sight, then damage dealt to the after images will not apply despite them still being visible. Though sometimes it seems to work. If the enemy does get back into line of sight for as long as those after images are up, then you can still deal damage to them again as long as they stay within the terms. It helps to know that the after images have the same range as your focus passive, so by the time you use your ultimate, you should already have an idea for how far you can expect it to work. Also, it's worth noting that the enemies who stand still can't be headshot, since when standing still, they do still leave an after image right where they're standing, and the after image hitbox is slightly larger than their original hitboxes. You can still just double body shot them for a kill instead. When it comes to Hawkeye's ultimate, many do suggest that you should just spam the arrows into the after images for the highest damage per second before the buff in patch 1.5. That might have been the case, but I never actually saw anyone test it or, provide the numbers for it, so I decided to try it out. And here are my results. If you're trying to kill a squishy that normally would die from 2 body shots, then whether you decide to shoot 2 full body shots or spam 3 limb shots makes a marginal difference in your damage per second. But hitting the enemies over longer range with a fully charged shot will be easier, and spamming shots will be safer as you aren't locked into the same position. So whether you spam shots or do 2 full charge shots on a squishy target depends on the range and whether you need to move around. The difference becomes a lot more noticeable once you start looking at higher health targets, or if you want to deal out as much damage as possible in a short period of time. When we are using these chunky Galactabots that have 600 health for reference, spamming my arrows into them kills them about 40% faster compared to letting my arrows fully charge, leading to a significantly higher damage per second than if you would be spamming. As usual, actually hitting them in the head is going to be the fastest way, but is a lot riskier, and unless you have the perfect conditions, then shooting the after images is just going to be safer. The high damage from the permanent max focus and faster draw speed is incredibly helpful, not only if you're spamming shots into after images, but it's also perfect when you want to snipe several enemy supports out of their ultimates. A good example of this could be Cloak and Dagger. The faster draw speed makes it easier to line up and hit your shot in time, and since you already have full focus, this lets you keep aiming for the Cloak and Dagger rather than having to divert your focus and charge off of any other target that you can find. Also, slightly related, it does help to jump before activating your ultimate to stop yourself from getting one shot as you're doing the animation. Anyways, a common mistake that I see a lot of Hawkeyes do, myself included, is pop the ultimate and then go to town and then completely forgetting that you turned yourself into a massive target. If you're trying to get the most out of your ultimate, I know you're going to want to be able to see as many of the enemies as possible and get as many after images as possible, but try to play your angles at least a little bit conservatively and try not to tunnel vision on having as many enemies visible at the same time. Try to peek one at a time, ideally a squishy, a flyer, a priority target, and keep opening yourself up more and more gradually as you work through the enemy team. The after images take additional damage from your area of effect abilities. Not only does that include your Crescent Slash, which we mentioned previously, but it also includes your explosive arrows, which in theory could let you one-shot an enemy if enough after images are caught in the blast. As for the explosive arrow, It's not something that I've ever done myself, but in theory it can be very worth to swap to your explosive arrows to secure some huge kills if you're in a situation where there are a ton of enemy after images active at the same time. For example, if all of your enemies are running around in close proximity. From my testing, I couldn't get a one-shot's worth on a singular target with all 3 arrows, no matter what I did, but I could quickly 2-tap an enemy if they were close enough. Overall though, while it's fun to discuss these potential cheese plays, you'll always be better off just trusting your bow and arrow, and most importantly, your own aim when using the ultimate. When it comes to your positioning, and huge disclaimer here because we got in some comments about this and I feel like I gotta mention it. When it comes to positioning, target focus, and these types of things, it's not exactly black and white, so don't take this as gospel. But hopefully this guide will give you some insight in how I think about it and how you generally will want to approach the game. Disclaimer aside, positioning yourself really comes down to not overexposing yourself. In general, you're gonna want to be in the middle of your backline depending on what the enemy team is playing, but you will oftentimes find yourself taking off angles or high grounds that deny the enemy flankers or enemies from running up for free. Playing from these off angles and high grounds also give you windows to peek, either just by walking up or double jumping, which can let you secure picks on priority targets or the backline. Generally speaking, the best position for Hawkeye will be the position where you can dish out as much damage as possible without dying. And sometimes that might just mean blowing up the enemy tanks, easy headshots rather than going for risky peeks and being all the way off to the side. Just keep that in mind, especially when you keep in mind that playing Hawkeye invites the entire enemy team to focus you no matter what. I can't even begin to try counting just how many games I've had the entire enemy team start running me down just to kill me, ignoring the point, my tanks, or my teammates. And the more focus you're getting, the more passive or even defensive you have to position yourself to stay alive. Sometimes just having all 6 enemies tripping over themselves to kill you and failing is enough for you to have a positive impact on the game, despite not killing anyone, which can lead to some wins, assuming your teammates can work with the free space that they are gifted. Moving on into the bans, despite his self-heal abilities, Hawkeye's biggest weakness will be dive and melee heroes. That being said, while he has a good way to escape combos like Magic, Spider-Man, and sometimes even Black Panther, Hawkeye really struggles with Iron Fist in particular. I don't want to condone anyone banning Iron Fist over other meta heroes, but if the enemy does have an Iron Fist player and you want to play Hawkeye, then banning Iron Fist will make your life a lot easier. Additionally, Captain America can be a problem for just about the same reason, since he sticks on top of you and has a spammable shield that you can raise every time you shoot. But again, at the moment, I wouldn't say that he's worth banning just yet. As for heroes you might want on your team, just having a full composition with tanks and supports will help a whole ton. Thanks to your high damage output and ability to one-shot, I wouldn't say that the other damage dealers are as necessary to make up for your flaws. Like if we compare Hawkeye to a Black Panther or other diver that might need another diver or someone dishing out even more damage, he's pretty self-sufficient and can make things happen on his own. He doesn't need anyone to pick up his slack, though it does help to have more damage dealers as well. Especially someone like a Namor or Hela that just helps deal with the flankers if they do die. Moving on, there are a few specific hero counters I haven't talked about that I'd like to mention that you might find very helpful when you're playing Hawkeye. First, if Jeff is being an overall nuisance, then spamming arrows into him will make a huge difference, especially when he comes out of the ground to spit, since his whole body practically is a head. If he stays submerged and you are struggling with hitting him, then you could spam your explosive arrows at him. If he uses his ultimate, then you could use your ultimate as well when he charges it up, double jump out of the way, and then spam the after images to easily kill him when he tries to run away. You can also just use the explosive arrows here as well, or even both. Punisher's turret can be pretty annoying, but actually has a pretty big weakness. His stupid head is actually vulnerable at the very top of the turret. If you just gain a little bit of high ground, or just double jump I guess, and hit the turret at the right place from the right angle, then you can instantly one-shot him with a fully charged headshot. As I mentioned, specific combo heroes with knockups such as Spider-Man or Magic are pretty easy to counter as a Hawkeye. If you get knocked up, then you can just double jump out of the way and or use your Crescent Slash to send them backwards if it's on cooldown. It'll still be a bit tricky to hit them, especially after being animation locked by the slash if that's what you use, but it will usually stop them from hitting you with more damage for a little while. Hawkeye is also a great tool to minimize Loki's effectiveness, since you easily can charge up arrows and destroy runes and Loki clones with one hit. Since the clones stand still, they're really easy to hit, and you are literally the best hero in the game for taking care of them across any ranges. Using your Crescent Slash against a Hulk who has jumped in and probably is charging his next jump will cancel his charge, which keeps him on the ground and turns him into an easy kill for you and your teammates. And of course, off-angling to destroy Penny Parker's spider nests are also a great way to open up the map without too much risk. Just charge your arrows on any enemy and then shoot the nest, but if you can't get a good angle, then you can just swap to your explosive arrows and let the splash damage take care of the nest around the corner. As for your Crosshair, I'd say that Hawkeye might be the one hero in the game at the moment that goes against my philosophy of never using any gimmicky addition to your Crosshair. While the default Crosshair is a bit cluttered, I've found that a simple dot with as minimal of a ring surrounding it as possible helps the most. It gives me the accuracy without the clutter of a simple dot. It helps me track moving targets to build focus, and most importantly, the minimal ring lets me see when my arrows are fully charged. You can sort of learn when your arrow is fully charged based on, I guess, intuition and a lot of experience, but there is actually no tell in the game when you are fully charged. So there will be a lot of unnecessary trial and error to know when you will do maximum damage without it, compared to your other resource of having your focus counter just being filled up on its own. And when you combine that with knowing that the circle is fully closed, then you can be confident that your arrow will deal the maximum possible damage. I will put the code for the crosshair that I use in the description if you want to try it out. For that matter, any minimal crosshair, like a cross-shaped one, could work here as well. What matters is making sure that the reticle animation is enabled, and ideally as minimal and as far from distracting as possible. Hawkeye, like any other high accuracy hero, relies a lot on having good accuracy. Sure, spamming shots into the enemy team will net you the occasional kill every once in a while, but you're leaving a lot of kills on the table by not having that pinpoint accuracy. While I'm currently working on a more in-depth guide to improve your aim in Marvel Rivals and other shooters, by the way, subscribe for that, practicing the feel of Hawkeye specifically will make you perform a lot better. The routine I normally do to warm up and get used to this guy, and actually probably most heroes of the game, is hopping into the firing range, going all the way into the bottom here, and then setting up the bots with these settings. Afterwards, I just start the scenario and keep shooting at the bots for at least 5 minutes, alternating between headshots and body shots, sometimes ulting and occasionally jumping or doing other things that I would be doing as a Hawkeye. After this, it helps to pull them up in a quick match if you want to get used to playing against real humans, but you have to remember that a large part of hitting your shots as a Hawkeye, especially over range, other than your mouse control, is going to be prediction based. So you will ultimately always have the best practice against players, so I'd suggest giving it a try in ranked, especially if that's where you want to play him. But obviously don't come crying here if you lose points or if you get flamed before you get used to the guy. He's a very high skill floor and high skill ceiling hero, but I am telling you, if you practice for long enough, then you'll be able to solo carry games with Hawkeye and climb ranked like no other. My fastest run to Celestial was with Hawkeye. Hopefully this guide helps, and if you guys want to check out my soloq to Celestial and see just how I did it for some inspiration, check out the video on the screen. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace out.